Hi, I'm Lisa Small. I'm the Senior Curator of European Art at the Brooklyn Museum, and welcome to Monet and Venice. This exhibition is the first exhibition to focus on a really interesting moment in Monet's career, his one and only trip to Venice in 1908 when he was already 68 years old. He didn't want to go to Venice. He was busy working in Giverny on the water lilies, but his wife, Alice, decided that he needed a break from what she described as the endless water lilies. And so they had an invitation from a friend of theirs, and Alice said, "We have to go." And so Monet very reluctantly went. He only planned to stay there for a couple of weeks maybe, but like so many other artists before him, he fell in love with the city, and he ended up staying there with Alice for 2 months and created a really beautiful, fascinating body of work, which we're pleased to feature. I'd love to show you some highlights of the exhibition, so join me for a walkthrough. The first thing we wanted to do is transport you to Venice. So when you first walk into the exhibition, you'll enter a multi-sensory immersive space. We worked with a videographer based in Venice who captured extraordinary footage of the city from sunrise to sunset. We worked with him so that he could capture specifically some of the same vistas that Monet saw, the places that he stayed, together with the beautiful soundscape by our composer in residence, Niles Luther, and a lovely light fragrance that evokes marine air and nymphaeus. The space is a really wonderful starting point for visitors to capture the mood and the magic of Venice. So we're in the first gallery of the exhibition. It's called the Monets in Venice. And in here we're establishing what their trip was like, how they went, where they stayed. They arrived in Venice in October of 1908. They first stayed at the Palazzo Barbaro with their friend Mary Hunter, who had rented the palazzo. And we have a beautiful painting by John Singer Sargent of the interior of that palazzo from a few years before Monet's visit. And I love the painting because the window in that room, Sargent didn't quite include it, but out that window is this enormous view of the Grand Canal, which Monet would have seen and been able to paint images like this one of the Palazzo Dario with its beautiful multicolored marble facade. We're also really thrilled to have a selection of personal postcards and letters that Alice wrote to her daughters and granddaughters from Venice. One of the most important ways we know about Monet's trip to Venice is through Alice's eyes. He was with her, so he didn't have to write to her, which is what he normally would have done, but she wrote every day, and she was sitting beside him in the gondolas while he painted, and next to him in the hotel looking out the window that he painted from. So her insights really help us tell the story of how Monet was feeling, about his work, how it was progressing, and also how much they both loved Venice. We're here in the second gallery, which is called La Serenissima, which means the most serene. That is how Venice was referred to in the 18th century. And in this gallery, what we wanted to do was establish how significant the tradition of painting Venice was, particularly in the 18th century, and particularly in the hands of an artist like Canaletto, who was perhaps the most famous practitioner of this tradition of painting Venetian views. If you were a wealthy grand tourist visiting the city in the 18th century, you would want to buy one of Canaletto's paintings to take home as a souvenir. If you were slightly less well off, you could buy a portfolio of prints. We have a beautiful 18th century portfolio in this exhibition. Monet was not one to pay too much attention to these kinds of traditional subjects, but he was certainly aware of this tradition and of Canaletto. And in fact, one of the funny things is that Monet painted many of the same images that Canaletto did, including the Palazzo Ducale. So what's wonderful about this space is that we have this extraordinary painting by Canaletto, and then just to the other side, we have Monet's rendition of that same subject. And what we also see in this comparison in this gallery is that whereas Canaletto and other artists were interested in the details of the spectacles and all of the people and the crowds that made up Venice, Monet would eliminate all of that. His images are devoid of people, they're very still, they're very focused on the water and the architecture. In this small section of the gallery, called The Painter of Water, we talk about Monet's career-long obsession with painting water. He was always painting on the water, from the water, And so we made a point of trying to gather pictures from his career that speak to this obsession in different places and different times. The earliest work by Monet in the exhibition is the one I'm next to here. It's from 1874, the very year of the first Impressionist exhibition. And you can see in this painting of boats on the water and the reflections beneath the foundational motif, really, of Monet's career. He's actually painting from his studio boat, a raft that he retrofitted with a cabin on it so that he could paint inside. And when he went to Venice, a gondola would serve the same purpose. So we really wanted to emphasize this through line of painting on water. This gallery is called Enveloppes and Reflections. Monet was fascinated by reflections, but also this term that Monet used called the envelope, a French term that he used to describe the kind of colored atmosphere, the colored light that surrounded anything he was painting. He very famously said a number of times in interviews that he wasn't interested in painting the bridge or the boat. He was interested in painting what was between him and the bridge and the boat. So this idea of this atmospheric space called the envelope. So in this gallery, again, we have paintings that range from London, other pictures of Venice, pictures of Normandy, and all of them feature this beautiful kind of composition that emphasizes the reflective surface of the water and this extraordinary colored atmosphere. In the 19th and early 20th century, many other artists began to come to Venice, particularly Americans. And in this section of the exhibition, Vistas and Vignettes, we've brought together a number of other works by American artists, also some other European artists, many of whom Monet knew. Some like Turner were important influences for him. And we wanted to show the different vocabularies, the different artistic vocabularies that artists were bringing to bear on picturing this romantic, mysterious city. And so, for example, we're able to feature some of our extraordinary Sargent watercolors that you see here. Sargent was a great friend to Monet, and his watercolors are among the most extraordinary of his works. We also have works by Whistler, another American artist that was who was very close with Monet, and Renoir. One really exciting object in this section that we're so thrilled to have is a very small but beautiful watercolor by Paul Signac. He painted very frequently in Venice, and when Monet returned from Venice, he bought one of Signac's little watercolors of the Salute Church and hung it at his home at Giverny. And we have the loan of that object. So it's very thrilling to see an object here that he owned and obviously connected with. In the few years before he went to Venice in 1908, Monet had started painting what would become his most famous body of work, the water lilies paintings. And he was obsessed with them. He was planning an exhibition of the water lily paintings in 1909, and his dealer came to the studio and saw them and gave Monet a rather lackluster report about them. He didn't think he could sell them. And Monet, being an artist that was always filled with self-doubt and anxiety, was pretty upset by this. He destroyed some of the water lilies paintings, and he decided to cancel the show altogether. And it was at that very moment that Alice got the invitation to go stay with their friend in Venice. And so she was very encouraging that he take that opportunity to leave the garden, go to Venice, and sort of clear his mind. So it was important for us in this exhibition to have a moment where we address the chronological and sort of conceptual relationship between the water lily paintings and the Venice paintings. So in this gallery, we have 3 beautiful water lily paintings, one from 1907, which is just before he went to Venice, and 2 slightly larger ones that were from some years afterward when he was beginning the work that would result in the beautiful installation at the Orangerie of the panoramic water lilies. When Monet returned from Venice, he wrote to his dealer right away to say, "Don't worry, I can now move forward with my water lily show because my trip to Venice has made me see my work with new eyes." Before Monet even returned from Venice, his dealers were vying to show the works that he would bring back with him. He came back from Venice, he put those works aside to continue working on the water lilies. He wanted to go back to Venice with Alice, they both did, but sadly she became ill and passed away in 1911. And so Monet was finishing these paintings in his studio, filled with grief, thinking about Alice and the happy time that they had there. It was the first exhibition that he was going to be preparing for without her by his side. So in this room, we are surrounded with the results of that in this beautiful panoramic circular installation where we can look at all of the different motifs. And the most amazing thing is that we're also surrounded by the symphony that Niles Luther composed, inspired by the images of Venice and inspired by the story of Alice and Claude there.
Lisa Small and I, we met several years ago, and she shared this beautiful idea with me, this concept of Monet's envelope. And that really got the creative juices flowing for me, because I felt that there was this really beautiful parallel in the musical world. So we really created this installation in this room to subsume the viewer and put them in the center of this symphonic experience. And the most interesting thing, I think, is that each movement corresponds to a particular motif that we see hanging on these walls. So the first motif is the Palazzo Ducale. In the music, we have this kind of floating melody, these unresolved harmonies, this sense of suspension. It's really supposed to give this feeling of atmosphere, of impression, of unresolved tension, similarly to the way that we look at the Palazzo Ducale paintings, and we feel that sense of floating suspense. The second movement in the symphony is for the San Giorgio Maggiore motif, and that's a very special motif and melody, particularly because on October 9th, 2024, I was in San Giorgio Maggiore with Lisa when the very first melody of the symphony came to me, kind of like a bolt of lightning as we stood in the church. The fourth movement is for the Grand Canal. When you are on the Grand Canal in Venice, it's very busy. There are boats everywhere, human beings everywhere making all of this noise. But in Monet's actual paintings, there's no humans. It's very still. So I decided to write that movement as a solo for clarinet and orchestra to give this sense of just total tranquility, absolutely placid and peaceful. On the other hand, we get to the fifth movement, which is for the Palazzo Contarini, and I feel that's kind of the opposite of what's happening with the Grand Canal. Monet paints the motif like as if it was several yards away, and we see the beautiful structure of the Palazzo Contarini with its kind of Gothic facades and this beautiful architecture. So I wanted to translate that architecture into its musical equivalent, and what better musical equivalent than a fugue. We hope you love to see and hear Monet's paintings and my symphonic installation.
Thank you so much for joining me for this tour of Monet in Venice. This exhibition is the largest Monet exhibition in a New York City museum in 25 years. I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you in the galleries.